Three, two, one, we're on. Hi, this is James Ledoux, and you're watching my interview with Jason Linett in preparation for my Hypnothoughts Live 2020 online presentation. So a little bit about Jason that I know. Jason is an award-winning hypnotist. He's a founder of multiple businesses, including Virginia Hypnosis, Work Smart Business, best-selling author of Work Smart Business, which I own a signed copy of, full disclosure. And Jason and I have sat in multiple classes together as participants, and I've attended multiple classes with Jason as a student, and I do own some of his products. So just full disclosure there, there's been no transactions so far around that. So I'll hand it over to Jason. What did I miss?
Yeah, I would say the mindset is that of being the hypnosis business guinea pig, that rather than teaching theory and armchair philosophy, the adventures of beginning as a full-time stage hypnotist in the late 2000s, and then from there getting into opening up Virginia Hypnosis, and then seeing that there was a different way to look at the education of the process, and that's when I began training. So the nature of testing out what's actually working in our industry right now and informing others how to get out there and help a lot of people and, yes, indeed, make it rain.
Make it rain, yes. So how did you get into course creation, if we could start there? So some people may be watching this as part of Hypnothoughts Live as a supplemental content, but I imagine some people may be seeing this in ICBCH, which we can talk about later, but in the Train the Trainer program, or in some of the hypnosis academies, it may show up there, or it may even be on YouTube. So there could be a variety of people, but what I thought I'd talk about is just set the stage for instructional design. What is it? We won't spend a lot of time on that. If they want to see that, they can watch my talk, and then just talk to you about how you approach the topic. So for those watching who are interested in instructional design, it's the formal or informal process of planning out instructional content to make it engaging, effective, and all of that. And there's various levels. I approach it from someone who's been in the corporate training game for 20 plus years. And there's going to be others watching that are more academic than I am and may know more about it as well. But then you come from a real world perspective, having created courses and sold them, creating multiple six-figure incomes for yourself. So how did you get into course creation?
Yeah, so let's begin positively with the negative, which would be that, you know, as we're creating change, there's the old mindset that we're either moving toward pleasure or we're moving away from pain. So the original intent was actually an away from strategy. And just to call it out, I had phenomenal instruction. I had outstanding trainers in my early days as a hypnotist. That part of that journey was a discussion with my wife of, hey, before we have kids, how about I do every bit of training I possibly could do right now? So it was perfect timing, so that then when the kids came along, then now I bring people to me. So I bring this up because I left a lot of my original trainings by going, okay, I know a lot of really cool information. I know the ins and outs of specific techniques and protocols, but how the heck do I put it all together? Where now there was a client in front of me and I had this amazing toolbox at my disposal, but when do you use this one? When do you use that one? So it was then over the years in the trenches, actually doing the work, seeing thousands of clients and figuring out how do we, little things, how do we clean up this transition? What if this hypnotic induction isn't working and I need to now seamlessly pivot to something else? What if the client is not responding? I'm going to sneeze and it's about to be amazing. Welcome back. What if this client is not responding to this specific process and I want to now move it to something else? So it was the years of kind of figuring that out on my own, because that really wasn't covered in a lot of my trainings, which I'll call this out. That was where I had been doing training briefly at that point, but I was basically repeating someone else's course. I was being told that I should give out a packet of scripts as well as a DVD teaching people how to read those scripts. And in the words of every decent infomercial at 3 a.m, there's got to be a better way. So that's where I started to, craft a course based around the fact of, well, here's what I do. Here's what I found to be effective, while still, of course, covering the core curriculum as to what was required and what was necessary, and covering that information. So it's where now, in the shape of the event, just to kind of maybe jump ahead a question,
sure,
It's the shape of the event. We begin by setting the foundation as to here are the most basic principles of hypnotic suggestion: pacing and leading, calibration to the person in front of
Right.
you. And nearly every advanced strategy is going to come back to those basic principles. But then from there, now it becomes the task of I'm only ever adding a few new, let's call them ingredients along the way, introduce a concept, go off, practice that, come back, let's discuss. Here's a new concept, let's discuss that. Here's a
Right.
demo of it, go off and practice that, come back and discuss, which rapidly builds a course where now by the second or third day, the students are doing full hypnosis sessions
Yeah, they're
in
going
practice,
through
getting that
literally
refinement
a
of those
stair step
transitions.
to where at the end they've had multiple days worth of hands-on application in your courses. So I've attended courses with you, and yes, you explain the theoretical, and then you give us a real-world exercise, and then you come
Yeah.
back and talk about that, and then you keep layering it on, and so by the end of the class, you've experienced so much, and you didn't
James, the audience
necessarily
for
feel
this
it.
is mostly hypnotists, yes?
Hmm?
The audience for this is mostly hypnotists?
I would guess most of them are going to be hypnotists.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. So let's go off on a quick rant here. Here's the here's the characterization of too many workshops that probably some of you have attended. The person comes out and they're about to speak on whatever topic, and they end up lecturing on it for about 30, maybe 35 minutes, at which point they glance at their clock and realize, oh, wait, I wanted to do a demo.
Yes.
Now let's do a demo. They then call someone up. The clock is now ticking. They have about 15 minutes left of the presentation to do the demo. They rush through the demo. Then halfway through, they might look at the audience and go, you know, for this issue, I might have used another tactic. And then in the course, you're laughing way too soon because you've been in those too. So you have to give people the context. So this is where a simple structure, and this is just one such example. I'll do a demonstration. I'll teach the concept of what they just saw a demo of, because now everybody has a frame of reference. To use a negative word, the only reason why people ask stupid or let's say ignorant questions in a class is they don't yet have a frame of reference.
Sure.
So by giving them that frame of reference because of a demo, then here's the teaching. Now go off and practice it. Everybody is now speaking the same language. So if you do the same thing in course creation, if you do the same thing in a 1-hour talk, you're going to have a much greater result.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the things you mentioned is your talks. I've sat through your keynotes multiple times. Those are always amazing.
Thank you.
And one thing we should talk about at some point is how you layer in effortlessly the hypnotic language patterns in a way that you're in a room full of hypnotists and many of us aren't even noticing what you're doing. But I'd like to talk to you about those sort of principles you use in your talks and in your classes. I guess skipping ahead, I'm going to talk about the theory of instructional design and what I think about it. But how do you layer in those hypnotic elements for the hypnotists that are watching into your course? You know, things
Well,
like
you
pattern
use the phrase, and
interrupts.
thank you for that. You use the phrase effortless, and I'll tell you why it is. And there's a story that comes out of this too. Early on, my first introduction to things, hypnotic language patterns and hypnotic influence methods, actually, I was a magician as a hobbyist, as a teenager. And there's a man by the name of Kenton Knepper, Knepper. I'm not sure if this product is still available. Now that I've said it, I might hunt it down and buy it today because it's been a while. But he put out a product called Wonder Words.
Wonder
And
words.
Wonder
Okay.
Words was introducing these language patterns to magicians. And just to give you a preview as to what Kenton was doing, he would create these dual reality magic tricks where for the volunteer up on stage, their perception was that this is what happened. And for the audience, their perception is that that's what happens. So through the magic of communication, they could talk to each other and the stories lined up. So this was the first entry into it, to which I recognized there's probably more going on than I knew. So that's when it became buying videos and reading books. And I forget what reference it was, but it's kind of similar to the mindset of rapport, that rapport is not, the techniques of rapport are not things that were invented. They were discovered by tracking people who were already in sync with each other. So if all of these language patterns were actually modeled from people who were effective speakers, something clicked to go, if this is modeled after effective communication, we might as well communicate effectively at all times. So it's where there's a precision to the language. There's a care towards, again, back to the away from originally, a care towards the intention of transitions. And simply put, how do I say the most amount of information in the shortest amount of time using the least amount of words? That the more we add to it, the more we start to convolute and confuse it. So it's the intention of getting to that briefest version of something. And the other, the note to this is that there was a local trainer who was doing a one-day event just on NLP skills for people in business. And the main core of it was the rapport stuff. I referred a friend to go take it. And most of it, again, was pacing and leading, language patterns, and then the basics of NLP rapport. And this woman is a major salesperson in a major business. And it's a month later, I'm like, hey, Martha, how'd the workshop go? And she goes, oh, it was amazing, but I just haven't had the time to practice it. Which, remember, she's in sales. She's one of the people leading a major sales organization. She's constantly communicating with people. So I stopped the mindset of this is something special that I use in a certain time and place, and instead bring it to that greater influence. I don't if people, I as people.
As people.
If you're interested in this, check this out. No, and as you want to see more of this, go to this website.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that. I felt it. And even for those watching, you can see Jason speaks extemporaneously in a way that few people do. And I used to think you were reading from a teleprompter or a script, but I've seen you do it live in person. And I watched you for multiple days at David Snyder's workshop, at HypnoThoughts Live, in Carl Smith's workshop for Kinetic Shift, and then in the Train the Trainer for ICBCH. And I kept waiting for you to break, and you never do. This is just how you do it. And perhaps it didn't always start this smoothly, but that's just where you are. Probably 10,000 hours of working on this, if you believe in that 10,000 hours.
Though, as you're talking about instructional design, this does bring about, and you're not doing this thing that I'm about to talk about, so we can playfully poke at it. There's a class that I taught one time, and there's a woman in the group who every transition, I did my professional career originally working in production management. So stage management, behind the scenes, all things technical theater. That's what I began with, and burned out beautifully, and then went full time with the hobby of hypnosis. So every transition of this training, she's going, it is so good that you found this hypnosis. This is what you were born to do. And like, she's being really polite. Now I'm going home at night and it's keeping me up. I'm talking about it to Michelle, my wife, and I'm like, she is praising the hell out of me and she is so polite. Why is it bothering me? And like, Michelle's going, take the compliment, move on. And it finally clicked, and I started to, and I mind read this a bit, but then I checked in with her. The flaw she was making. Look at how good you are. I can't do that. There's back to the magic world. There's a magician who at the end of his act, he gets up and he goes, folks, everything you've seen me do this evening, a 5-year-old could do. It's so easy. A 5-year-old could put in the effort to do this. Everything you've seen tonight, a 5-year-old could do. After 25 years professional training and experience. And I love that because he wasn't saying it was so simple that, this is where they can begin right away.
Right.
The Gladwell thing about the 10,000 hours, which even he was modeling someone else's dialogue about 10,000 hours, and the original person disagrees with his read on it. Let's not go there. But it's where by doing the work, by putting in the effort, the mistake is to compare, here's where I am and here's someone else. It's instead, I can see with practice, I'm going to get better at that, which these are, some of the little practice nuances to a training event. So as we're designing a course, to kind of highlight where they should be in the course of the event, or for anyone out there instructing, here's a way to gain an extra, let's say minimum 3 hours out of a 5-day event. Hey, everybody, when you go off to practice, if one of you understands the exercise better than the other, rather than sit there and talk about it for 20 minutes, the person who understands the exercise, that's who should run it first. Because this way, then the other person will hear the exercise and that will most likely answer their questions.
Right.
I tell my students this all the time because otherwise, here's these other 5 groups that are done, and here's group number 6 that's still talking about it.
Well, and that brings up a point which, you can talk about with instructional design or anything, I suppose, is that there's the theory and then there's the application, and you want to have a foot in each camp, right? But I have been in classes of all kinds where people are dissecting it and dissecting it. And this is the same person who then may go on to take 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 classes on the subject, but never bringing it into the real world, never applying it, because the best way to learn is to teach. I think
street smarts rather than the book learning.
Book learning, exactly. So let's
No,
talk
it's
a little
where,
bit about
and
that.
I'm not original in this concept. I mean, my whole thing is the branding of working smart. David Snyder's is, I believe, pure NLP, and then all the classes are like real world conversational hypnosis.
Right.
Because again, back to where we started this chat, what good are the methods unless you can actually put them into use? Because there's a more so, I'd say, in the NLP community, this sort of heady, I can stand off to the side and point at that sentence and say, oh, that's a non-specified referential index.
Right.
Okay, can you actually do it?
Right.
Because some people find that as they're learning, that the more you make use of these methods, your confidence grows more and more. I just did it.
See what he did there? Yeah. And so that's really a point in that there's 2 levels to this, right? First, I would say, is the sort of academic approach where you're methodically planning out your content and the exercises you're going to do and the points you want to cover, and perhaps even writing formal objectives. Upon completion of this course, you will be able to X, Y, and Z. Now, I've seen your courses. You don't necessarily start in a stilted manner and say, upon completion of this course, you will be able to write effective extemporaneous hypnotic language patterns, exhibit flawless control of your, you don't necessarily start that way, but you may be thinking that way as you're building your course. So how do you approach creating a new course? Do you pen and paper it? Are you, journaling it out, writing scripts? How do you approach your content?
I tend to, there's a mindset to this, because this is actually something, as I'm in the midst of building out a new podcast, a new series of products. So I'm going into a recreation mode, and some of it is, going out to different audiences. When I wrote my book, it was the game of, I was mind mapping with, and I called this the serial killer strategy, but it's a basic mind mapping strategy. I had Post-its like on a wall. If you're going to do this, use poster board, because then you can move it.
Yes.
But I had these little Post-its. Yep, there you go. And I was then doing what are the big sections and then moving things around. If I found that that was stifling, again, the business mindset of all that I do is it's very rarely the platform. It's almost always the strategy. And I think you and I have had some conversations at times around strength training.
Yes.
And there's a principle even in strength training that if you are plateauing, let's say in a barbell bench press, switch the devices to like maybe something else. You can try to do like 2 kettlebells or 2 dumbbells, switch it over to something that's now a machine that's going to have a steady amount of pressure. And what that is doing from a physiological standpoint is making the muscles respond in a different way. And it may be, I say in a gym, there's 2 types of science. There's science and there's bro science.
Bro science, yes.
This may be bro science, but I've found it to be true. The same as if I'm in the midst of course creation, it may be, and that's why I've got a new pack of Post-its here, it may be that. It may be I'm just mind mapping by hand. Or, for example, what I'm in the midst of working on right now is not necessarily new information. It's just the same things I've always done, just now packaged into a new product. So for that, that I'm just doing by an outline in Microsoft Word.
Right.
But even so, like there's a new podcast that's in the midst of launching. And really what I want you to hear from this is that I'm changing up how I do things just to force myself to not fall prey to what I've done more easily.
Interesting.
So like I've signed up for a free Evernote account, and I'm only using that as podcast ideas come up for the new program. I'm putting those in Evernote. So that's this one thing that I'm using differently.
Yeah.
And similar to the strength metaphor, if I'm hitting a point of blockage, I'm going to change the strategy as to how I do it. The basic concept is the same.
Right.
But again, I'm going to change up the delivery method as to how I organize myself, which by the time, we're through to the end of it, we can't quite, track back to what it used to be. The same as, and I'll give you a story, as working with one of my consulting students this past week. that he was, I wouldn't say this was imposter syndrome, but he was reaching a point where he's going, who am I to put this message out there? Because Jason, you say this, here's this other person I've learned from, and they say this. And it's just a standard philosophy of how people produce change and defining for ourselves the thematic score as to why hypnosis works. And what it came down to was, it's not that he did not believe that he could do it. It was that the story wasn't yet his own.
Right.
So I'll share with you all, I gave him the assignment to go off and just say, mind map this, brainstorm this, outline this, and you've got all these incredible personal change stories of your own. You've been seeing clients in some respect or another in other industries. You need to collate your own stories to then reinforce this thesis statement as to this is why we can produce change. Because it's not that you don't believe that you can't do it. It's just that the message isn't 100% yet yours.
Right.
And that's what has to happen.
Well, you said a lot there. I'd like to unpack a little bit. I love that you talked about the methods that you use. So you mentioned mind mapping, one of my favorite methods. Some of my best decisions in life have come from mind maps, including quitting my full-time sales job and resuming my career as a management consultant doing instructional design and corporate training. After a Mike Mandel seminar as well, I realized, why am I suffering through this job that I hate? So his class was so inspirational. I said, I can't waste another minute doing this job I'm not happy with. So I'm going to go resume another career path and continuing to learn hypnosis. But you mentioned mind mapping. So that's a visual way of thinking. You can do it in paper, lo-fi on the wall. I loved your idea of using a Post-it board so you can move that around. I would also recommend people take pictures periodically in case Post-it notes fall off.
Yep.
And later you can go back through if you want. You probably never will, but you'll have those there for
Can
reference.
I go grab something real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's right over here. I just brought it. Just as we're cleaning up at home, just to show you, there's my book.
Oh, wow. Now,
yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a bullet point to talk to you about this.
Well, the bullet point was the result of, I did the mind mapping, and $12 in an art supply shop, and that's what the book lived in, and I'm keeping this. I'm not throwing it out.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it started as the mind mapping, and then from there, it then became an outline.
Right.
And just in the nature of how I did the book, then I narrated the book based off of my outline, telling my stories, because it was a bit of a Jason Linett greatest hits album, talking my stories. And then I spent about 6 months editing the transcriptions. So that was the book process. My manual for my classes, just to keep on topic here, the manual for the classes are really just collated transcriptions. I use the phrase in our hypnosis industry that we don't need any more scripts. We need transcripts. And for the new student of hypnosis, and even for the seasoned professional, I'm not an anti-scripts person. It's just that we have to change the filter. This is not the thing you just read to somebody. You look at the script as a piece of research, as if this was a transcript of one specific session with one specific practitioner with one specific client on that one specific day.
Right.
And it's just a record of what they may have done. And then from there, we can cherry pick the pieces that we could possibly use with our client.
Yeah, and you showed the portfolio, which I loved, and the bullet points. And so there's a progression from perhaps a brainstorm session to a mind map to a formal outline. And in your case, you dictated and then had that transcribed and then extracted and edited from that. So there's a couple things in there that people should take note of. One, use multiple modalities, whatever works. And then two, consider leveraging other tools. In your case, you're a big proponent of outsourcing. And so I had a bullet point to talk to you about outsourcing. But second to that, the little thing you glossed over was that outline, I know, was the result of you taking an online class for how to write a best-selling book and launch it, right? And so you're not only creating courses, you're consuming courses, and the output of a good course is you created a best-selling book on Amazon following a course, which, if I'm not speaking out of turn, you mentioned wasn't high fidelity. It wasn't. It was an amazing course instructionally, but it was recorded much like we're recording now on a mic with a webcam and that's pretty much it, right?
Which this brings up a cool side note, which, the more money that I have spent in professional development and ongoing education and hiring people smarter than me to help me build stuff, as much as I spend on that, the other income also goes up. And there I was watching this course that I invested about $5,000, and I took from other sources as well, which is
Right.
why I do gloss over, because I go, well, here's what I got from there. But then again, here's what I got chatting with people like Richard Nongard, who's put out more books than any of us and consistently pulls it off. So it was kind of an amalgamation of different things.
Right.
But this is where, let's reverse engineer this next statement, that just because the camera is on does not mean you have a product, is I think a message that people need to hear. Do you hear how I made a thesis statement and now we're going to unpack it?
Yes.
So just because the camera's on doesn't mean you have a product. And what I mean by that is it's a different style of instruction if you're now capturing something for a product versus now there's 20 people in the room and you're teaching them.
Right.
I've become a better live instructor by becoming a person who focuses, first of all, on creating the online program. Because the game used to be, how do I fill the 74, 80 minutes of a DVD? How do I fill the 2 hours of a VHS cassette tape? And nowadays, it's perfectly all right that here's, like, for example, my training module on, the way that I handled hypnotic age regression as peak performance. And here's the section just on anchoring. That only needs to be like a 5 or a 6 minute video. And it doesn't mean that's too long or too short. How long
Right.
does that individual video need to be? As long as it takes to teach that concept. So here I was watching this course that I'd spent about $5,000 for online, and worth every penny, self-publishingschool.com, Chandler Bolt, check him out. But by looking at that course, some of the best content was him with the earbuds plugged
Yes.
in, the cable hanging down.
That's the
Because I
image
couldn't
that's
care
set in my
less
mind.
about the production. It was more about what he was teaching.
Yeah.
That being said, I've got fancy lighting and a microphone.
Yes. My lighting is not so fancy right now. This is my first attempt at a recording here in this new house that I'm living in.
Nice.
But, that's the thing. I guess to create an effective course, it helps if you're an expert. Now, if you're not an expert, you can become an expert or interview other experts, as I'm doing here, and take what you can from them. And one of the things you mentioned was just because you have a recording doesn't mean you have a course, but you may have the foundations of a nugget that you can refine down and start to build a course from. And
I think that the greatest goal, and you've heard me say this before in the Train the Trainer with the ICBCH, is that my goal is always to help people to get the smallest, quickest win as fast as possible. Because, the mistake again, oh, look how good you are. The mistake that people could make is to go, I've got 2 core products, Hypnotic Workers and Hypnotic Business Systems. This is how to do hypnosis. This is how to run the business. And you could look at those that are custom build websites on custom build membership platforms with dozens of action plans inside of each one and go, I don't have that. Well, you're teaching a class on hypnosis perhaps, and get permission is always the key here, but get permission that you might have someone who wants a session but can't afford you. Well, they can pay by signing a video release waiver. And assuming the content is good and you can use it and, make it appropriately anonymous. I don't say their client's name. There's videos in my workers library where it says session with Denise. Her name was not Denise, and I never say her session name in the session, but she gave me permission to do this.
Sure.
And now before someone signs up, before someone attends my course, after they've signed up, they can watch an entire video, which, not to make this the game of filling the hours, but if my group required that I did 97 hours of a training, now I only have to do 96 because you've watched this, which is not the equation. But remember what I said earlier about people ask ignorant questions because they don't have a frame of reference yet. I can now teach so much more content in a 5-day event than I used to in 10 hours because I've shifted my affiliation with a group that admits the internet is robust and people can learn, just because they're not breathing the same air in the same room. So by having the students interact with vocabulary, by watching session demonstrations, by the time they show up, everybody's on the same foundation and we can jump into that hands-on street smarts of practice much sooner.
Yeah, and what you're describing is the hybrid approach, which you and Richard Nongard, expand on in the trainer course for ICBCH, which I've attended, and it sort of lines up with my 20 plus years of experience, which is, you know, in instructional design we talk about chunking, so grouping like topics and making them small and digestible. And you talked about, doing that with the anchoring video, making it just the right amount of time it needed to be. And that's the thing, you can build these courses one little chunk at a time, and that chunk might start off as a mind map anchoring, and then you write little things and examples you want, and you can use your third party stories or hypnotic stories, which act as a Trojan horse to carry ideas forward to your students. I took a Sandler sales training for a long time, and if anybody's attended Sandler sales training, you'll know it's either intentionally or unintentionally founded on hypnosis and NLP patterns. But they don't talk about it in that language. They say, okay, use third-party stories. So I have a client that did this, this, and this. It's a very easy way to get messages across. And not that you're saying I'm the greatest, but you're saying this is what a client said when we did this, this, and this. So you can embed
You also brought up
those.
something great there, which is that the result of the training, and I haven't had this experience now in a number of years, I think because our industry has gotten much better at the instruction, because people have been able to flourish and create their own designs, which is what their own courses, which is so great about, James, what you're doing here, that I would have people who attended a big training event and I'd ask them, well, how was it? And they would go, oh, he was just so nice and so giving and just shared so much information. I go, well, what are you going to do with it? And they're going, I know, but he was just so really friendly. And the end of the result of the training should not be the metaphor of all the students seated at the feet of the master looking up and going, wow, look how good they are.
Right.
It's instead their ability to let the process become their own. And if they can match, if not excel beyond. So just to keep it general, I may have surprised someone last year that she'd gone through a lot of my courses. And then at HypnoThoughts, I signed up for her course. And I got the feedback of, you're freaking her out. I'm like, no, she does that better than I do. So let me go see what she does and learn how to do that too. This is where I think teaching creativity is an interesting concept, that the deeper into the course, this is going to sound like a language pattern, the deeper into the course my students get, the more free form I let the practice become. So here's the
Right.
basic premise, but then do this and add that. Use a hypnotic induction of your choosing. Pick whatever deepeners you haven't yet practiced. Create a moment of hypnotic phenomenon, because now the students have the foundation and the formulas, which is not going to then be the game of, these are the words Jason said to say.
Right.
It's instead make it your own.
Yeah. And I guess it's like anything. If you look at music, and I can't really speak to music, I'm not a musician, but if you look at martial arts, you can learn these small patterns of movement. And in this martial art that I took in college, they talked about, this is the alphabet of movement. And as you got better and better, you could build more and more until you're, talking in complete sentences and responding to the person that you're working with, in ways that you maybe didn't expect, or eventually getting to that flow state where you're not worried about what technique you're going to use. You're listening and reacting to what the person in front of you gives you. And that ultimately would be synthesis, or one of the goals of real instructional design would be to take somebody from knowledge to awareness and all the way up the pattern until they can synthesize and improvise, if you will, without any conscious thought of what they're trying to accomplish necessarily.
I'm laughing because I realize there's something that I've done, and I've talked about this briefly, but let's throw it in here because I've been doing it the whole time, because start with the end in mind. So I know that you're going to likely upload this entire thing as it is for like the ICBCH community or whatever else you may want to use it for. But you also may be clipping out specific segments for a different presentation, which everybody right there model exactly what James is doing, because that ability to repurpose your own information from an educational and even from a business standpoint, it's a mistake to think that everybody has seen everything that you've ever done. And take that from me, the person who has now put out 2 podcast episodes of the Work Smart Hypnosis program called Hypnotic Outsourcing, because I didn't
It's
realize I'd already done one, but it's different information in both of them. So let it
it
go.
changed
But
over
as
time.
we're going through, I'm also editing in my head for my delivery your use of this. So it's where I've made it a point at sometimes just that briefest of a pause, thesis statement, unpack it, and then here's the final conclusion statement. This way I know for James in the final edits of this,
Yes.
and that can
Now,
now be used.
you presuppose that I know how to edit, but yes, that is my intention. Definitely,
You
this
want to
will
get
live on.
either ScreenFlow on Apple or Camtasia
Yes.
on Windows. Camtasia works for both, but ScreenFlow is better on Apple. And then all you have to do is like moving around a
Yep.
paragraph in text.
Yeah. I've done enough of it on audio, but not much on video. So this will be a nice
Nearly
new
identical.
learning experience. Nothing like a deadline to make you
Yeah.
work towards something. So we're getting close to your heart out, and people have seen me probably glance down a few times. I'm not losing interest in what Jason's saying, but I can't read my phone with my peripheral vision. So we have about 2 minutes. Anything last or thing you'd like to impart words of wisdom in terms of picking a good idea or taking that next step towards creating a great course? Anything you'd like to share in those regards?
Yeah, let's go metaphorical. Everybody should go to Netflix and watch the documentary Comedian with
Oh,
Jerry Seinfeld.
one of my
And it's
faves.
where the TV show went off the air. And then you see him on the road for a year workshopping material to be ready for that 1 hour on HBO. So HBO is paying him like $8 or $9 million. He's not just going to get up there and workshop new stuff.
Right.
So you see him on the road. And one night I was at a comedy club and he just comes out. And it was amazing because he was not good. And even he abandoned material halfway through a routine to go,
Right.
that's not going on HBO. And like the end of the act was him going, okay, my car's picking me up in like 5 minutes. Some of you know my material. Does anyone have any requests? And it was like seeing George Carlin bomb. And then suddenly him to go, someone yell out one of my bits and they go, baseball versus football. And then he just goes into an old, classic routine.
Right.
So to recognize that what we start with is not where we end up. And take note, about 20 or so minutes ago, I talked about a project that I'm in the midst of building out right now, which the first version of that is not going to be the final version of that. So just get started.
Right.
And even the words of Facebook is that done is better than perfect.
Yeah.
General George S. Patton, a perfect plan executed tomorrow. No, a good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. So get started. You're not going to have perfection, even when it's good and working. We just made a major overhaul on the Work Smart Hypnosis website in the midst of building out version 3.0 of it. So the beauty of education and even the digital age, we can keep rebuilding from new. I got to run to the next scheduled appointment, but you can check me out further, worksmarthypnosis.com, the best place to find more info from me and listen to the podcast, reach out and say hello. But thanks for watching.
I'd like to say thanks, Jason. Thanks for all your time, and talk with you soon.